Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the 86 F's to Give podcast. I'm your host, Al, and I'm so grateful that you are here with me for another episode of my podcast. We are on episode number 22. We are on episode 2 of 2025. So we are chugging along on our goals. I know this is a day late, so I am sorry about that. I'm trying to be nice to myself and understanding that life is crazy, and I am getting an episode up nonetheless, so I apologize it's late. I hope you all still enjoy on a Friday rather than a Thursday. But yeah, I have some exciting things to share at the top of this episode, and exciting things means one thing. If you are on a visual platform, you can see that I am wearing my very own podcast merch, I guess, if you shall. It is my podcast cover art embroidered onto a crew neck, and I'm absolutely obsessed with it. My dearest friend Maddie got it for me for Christmas, and it's just so perfect, and it's so cool for so many reasons. First of all, it's just like so thoughtful and so sweet. I will literally wear it everywhere, and I hope people ask me a million questions so I can advertise the pod. But also, sorry, Puna's freaking out on the couch right now if you're watching. Also, this is like not something I like made on Canva. Like, I drew this on my iPad. So not only is this like my handwriting, but it's my art, and this was completely my idea and design. Like, I drew it myself. So like, I don't know. I just think that's so cool that like my art is on a sweatshirt that I get to wear now. And I'm also wondering if anybody would want one. I'm kind of nervous to even pitch that idea, but my mom said she wants one, and I feel like some of my friends would want one. I'm not trying to like make money or sell merch. I just want to make this process easy for you guys. So if you do want one, DM me or text me. I have no idea how much they are. I will look into it, and maybe I can do like a bulk order for people, and you can just Venmo me the exact price of the sweatshirt. I'm not trying to make money on anyone, but it would be sick to have people walking around all over the world, all over the country in one of these bad gals. Okay, so if you want one, I will also probably post some pictures on Instagram of it, and I'll put some closer clips up in the visual on YouTube and on Spotify. Yeah, if you want one, let me know. I feel like it could be fun. Even if like 5 people want one, we could all be twinning. But yeah, that's all of my thoughts on that. It's really freaking cute, guys. And yeah, let me know if you want one. I think it'd be so fun for us to have some of these just wandering around, right? But yeah, thank you for joining us for another episode. Today we are talking about something that I am very passionate about, and that is crying. I am probably crying's biggest fan, biggest advocate, if you will. And I guess what we're 86ing hiding our tears and not letting ourselves cry. You know, I'll come up with a good title. We are going to be talking about all things crying. I did an Instagram question box last night to get people's thoughts on crying. I asked if people like crying, if they don't like crying, where they like to cry, why they feel like they can't cry. I called out men and asked what they feel about crying, and what society says about crying that makes you feel a certain way. Kind of just prompted people, and I got so many really, really awesome responses. So thank you if you replied to that story prompt. And it even, prompted some really awesome conversations in my DMs after you guys responded to the little story box, because I know it gives you a limit. So I didn't think about that. But so many people like started to type it out and then followed up with like a paragraph in my DMs, and it really gave such good insight and is completely driving this conversation that we're going to have today. So I'm very grateful for all of you submitting your vulnerable thoughts on such a vulnerable thing, such as crying. So yeah, thank you so much. I think this will be a fun episode, and obviously everything people submit is anonymous, so I will not be sharing any names or anything, but I will dive into what everyone shared in just a bit. But first, I wanted to first differentiate the different types of tears and crying that exist. I didn't even really think about this, but there are 3 different types. And then we'll dive into my thoughts on crying. Then we'll get into everyone's comments. And then I'll share some scientific benefits of crying, because there are like a handful of really good things that come from us releasing our tears. So first, there are 3 types of tears: basal tears, reflex tears, and emotional tears. The basal tears are just like our normal everyday little bit of tears that exist in our eyes just to keep our eyes like moist, damp, I don't know, lubricated. But then our reflex tears are the ones that occur when we like get something in our eyes, or we like hit ourself on the nose and it just like makes you cry. Like it's kind of just like a reflex, right? And then the emotional tears are when we are crying to, respond to an emotion, any emotion. It could be anger, sadness, happiness, excitement, all the things, frustration. And that is our body's way of kind of processing it outwardly. And studies show that the emotional tears have higher levels of stress hormones in them than the other 2. And that off the bat is one benefit of crying, because you're physically getting out those stress hormones, which is really important because you're probably crying over something that made you upset or stressed. So it's good to get those hormones out. So that's benefit number 1, but we will dive into a bunch more in a bit. But yeah, so I kind of came up with some thoughts, and I did a little bit of Googling, and based on what people said on Instagram of just why people hide their tears and are afraid to cry in front of people or just cry at all. And I think the biggest thing is that like society has deemed it as a sign of weakness. And some examples of that are like celebrities during award acceptance speeches are crying for getting or apologizing for getting emotional. And it's like, guys, this is a very cool thing. Or like your family's here to, like, you don't have to apologize for getting emotional over something that's like so cool. And then, or just like not seeing in movies and stuff, like not seeing men cry, or not really seeing parents cry in front of their kids in movies or in real life. Like I can maybe count, maybe both of my parents, I can count maybe on 2 hands how much I've seen them cry. My mom definitely more than my dad, but yeah, there's very few times I've seen them like really, really break down. I've seen them both like shed some tears. And I'm totally lying. My mom cries all the time like I do. So she's definitely, if she's listening to this, going to be like, what are you talking about now? But my dad for sure, like he'll get emotional more these days. But like as a kid, I can remember one time seeing my dad cry. And that was when we went to see We Bought a Zoo in theaters. And we were all sobbing at the end of that movie. But yeah, like there's just so many things in society that tell us that crying is weak, even without saying those exact words. And I think that's probably the biggest thing that factors into people being afraid to cry in public or just in front of people in general. And then a big thing for me is like not wanting people to know I'm upset, because I don't want them to ask what's wrong and then I cry more, or whatever is upsetting me is something that I don't really want to share. So I like don't want to make it obvious that I'm upset and then have people ask questions and then I have to share or whatever. And like, I know I don't have to, but like, that like awkward conversation just be like, I'm fine. And you're like literally crying. It's like, you're clearly not fine, but you don't want to say anything. So that I feel like is another factor of it. Like we just don't want people to like be in our business at the moment, or, maybe it's you're at work and you don't want your boss to know that you're crying or whatever. Like, I understand that for sure. I definitely have moments like that. And then I think it also stems back to a lot of us, this did not happen to me, but a lot of people being told to like suck it up as kids, or like boys don't cry, or real men don't cry. It's lines like that like dads or even moms were saying to their kids as like little kids, and then like couple that with not ever seeing your parents cry or seeing your dad cry. It's like, okay, well, my dad doesn't cry, so I'm not going to cry. And like, I see him process his emotions in other ways, so I'm going to do that. Like, and I think that just stems into us as adults not knowing how to fully get in touch with our emotions and express them how we are naturally meant to. So those are kind of my thoughts on why we hide our tears. And this was what I thought before I did the Instagram poll, and all of you kind of backed up my thoughts, which is awesome. We're all kind of on the same page here. But my thoughts on crying is, I've said this already, but I'm a huge fan of crying. I'm an advocate for crying. I think it's one of the healthier ways to process our emotions. I think there's a lot of unhealthy ways, such as, addiction or drinking or smoking, cigarettes, or anything that, even like shopping addictions that people do instead of processing there's so many things that people do that are less healthy than crying for 20 minutes. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm just like, I think it's probably one of the most healthy ways to kind of just get those emotions out, or just start getting them out. Obviously, laying in your bed for 10 minutes and crying is clearly not going to fix whatever issue you're crying about, but it's going to make you physically feel a little bit of relief and a little bit of pressure, laid off, and just start to release some of those hormones and begin to process whatever emotions you're feeling. And that's a whole thing too, with people saying like, oh, I don't get crying, like it's not going to fix anything, like why are you crying? And it's like, I'm not crying because I think it's going to fix, like that's not why I'm crying because I'm sad, and it's my immediate reaction is to let those tears out because I'm sad, right? And then I'll fix it. But I can't jump to fixing anything until I'm not in this super emotional state, right? So that's why I cry. I got to get the emotions out before I then can kind of go into fixing mode. Yeah, I'll pretty much cry at any emotion. I'll cry pretty much in front of anyone or anywhere. I mentioned earlier, there are some places that I will hold it in, but my mom and I are very similar in this way of like, eventually it will come out. Like the second I see my mom, I'm releasing the tears, or the second I get in my car, or I'm alone in the bathroom, or my favorite place to cry is the shower. So if I can get to the shower, that is where I will cry the most probably. But as soon as I'm in a safe place enough to cry, like I'm letting those tears are ready to go. So whether I cry the second something happens, or I cry later that day or the next day or whatever, like it's coming out. I'm never holding them in longer than I have to. So yeah, those are kind of my thoughts on crying. And I'm always the one telling my friends, like, it's okay, you can cry. Like a lot of people, I try to make crying feel safe around me. And I think I do an okay job because I cry in front of everyone, so they know they can cry in front of me. But yeah, I think it's just something that we shouldn't be embarrassed or feel ashamed about feeling our emotions or being sad about something. And I get it too. Like there's so many things where I'm like, I just don't want to be sad about this anymore. Like I don't want to cry about this anymore. Like obviously that's all very valid and fair, but sometimes we just gotta process it, and sometimes it takes longer than others, and some things take 1 10-minute cry and other things take a week of crying to process, and that's all okay. But now let's jump into some of the responses I got on Instagram. I want to first start with the people who said they like crying, then we'll dive into what responses I got about men and crying, and then we'll finish up with some responses that were kind of mixed reviews on crying. People saying they used to hate it, or now they're working on being better. We'll talk about it. But first, the people who said they like crying, I got a lot of people saying they like to cry, but not for too long, because then it feels like they're dwelling in it, which is valid. I think something I worked on in therapy last 2 years ago was to give myself a limit of time, whether it's a week, 2 days, an hour, to like be sad and feel bad for myself. And depending on the situation, obviously the time frame will vary, but once that time frame is up, I'm like, okay, I'm not gonna let myself just lay in bed and cry about this anymore. And I think that's like a healthy thing to do, because sometimes we can like spiral and get ourselves all worked up for no reason. So I liked that response a lot, of being like, okay, I can cry, but once it feels like I'm just crying to cry, like I got to pick myself back up and begin to like start solving whatever the issue is that's making me so sad. a lot of people just said, I have a lot of feels. I have a lot of big emotions. And that is so true. Like, again, with people saying they cry at every emotion or they just feel deeply, like that is so valid. And I loved getting those responses because that's me to a T. And I like fully related to those responses the most because sometimes in my head, I'm just like, I don't get that people like don't cry. Like, I just don't understand. But a lot of people's responses actually helped me begin to understand that. So some people said they love to cry, but they hate when people call them sensitive or say that it doesn't fix things. A couple people said that, and I thought that was a really, really good point. I also have been called sensitive my entire life. All 26 years, I have had somebody call me sensitive or dramatic or too much for the way I process my emotions and feel deeply. And I think that's them projecting. And I feel like I've gotten to a place where I'm able to ignore those kind of comments. But it's definitely something that people get told a lot. And crying and feeling is not people being sensitive, it's people being human. And I think kind of removing that word sensitive from removing it from being attached to the word crying or the action of crying, because like to me, like when I'm sensitive, it's because like someone made a joke that like probably wasn't that mean and I like get butthurt about it. Like, okay, maybe I'm being a little sensitive, but like also it hurt my feelings. So like, okay, whatever. Like if I'm being sensitive, I'm being sensitive. But I think like crying is not necessarily like the definition or aligned with being sensitive. I think crying is being human and feeling your emotions. And, you know, so I think it's really hurtful when people attach those two together and just kind of associate people that are sensitive with people that cry a lot, because I think those are two different things. I am both, but I think they're two different things. And then people also said someone said, this was a female that said she will cry in front of her dad or her fiance, but not in front of her mom or her like girlfriends. And I thought that was really interesting because I asked her, I was like, is that like a gender thing? Like you feel like you can only cry in front of men? Like that's really interesting. And she's like, I don't know, like maybe I just don't want women to look at me differently, or like, you know, like I'm not strong, or maybe it's a pride thing. And I thought that was really interesting as well because, you know, I never thought about crying in front of different like genders of people. But I think that's probably something that people do. And I think maybe like men feel more comfortable crying in front of like their mom or their partner instead of if they're dating a female, rather than like crying in front of their like guy friends or their dad, because you know what I mean? Like I think that might be true. Correct me if I'm wrong, men. But I thought that was really interesting. And I want to look into that more because I think that's probably something that is more present than I think it is, you know? And then, yeah, some people just said they love to cry in the shower, the car, their bed. All of those places are awesome places to cry. I feel safest crying in the shower. That the shower was my safe place to cry when I lived with two other people. And there was just like always people in our house. So I felt like I could cry in the shower and no one would know. And I would come out of the shower and like, of course my face is a little damp. I was just in the shower. Or, you know, if my eyes are red, I got shampoo in my eyes. Like, it's fine. So, yeah, I definitely love to cry in the shower. The car is also just, like, put on a sad song and just let it go. Like, that is a good place to cry as well. And, of course, my bed probably sees the most of the tears, for sure. Although the shower is probably close runner-up. But yeah, I think those are all like really safe places to cry, and a lot of people said that as well. I got some interesting responses from men, and in the Instagram question I put men ... why can't/don't you cry? And I got a lot of people that were like, we do cry. What do you mean? And I loved that so much. I had a couple people say like, I cry at least once a week. A couple men said that, and that they have no shame in crying, and that brought me a lot of joy. And someone did say that, you know, we do cry as men, but when like our friends or family are going through something, we feel responsible to be like the rock. And like if everybody's emotional and everyone's crying around something or about something that happened, like they feel like they need to be the one that's like not breaking down and being the rock and helping people through whatever they're going through, which I totally understand. Like I do understand it being like, okay, if we're all just gonna like sit here and cry about something, like maybe that's not the most helpful thing. But I do think like if you are feeling sad and you feel like you need to cry, like let it out. I think it's human. And to me, honestly, when someone cries with me, I'm like, oh, okay, we're all like feeling this and going through it, and like I'm not alone in feeling this big emotion. And I know once we are done crying, we'll work through it together, right? So I understand both sides of that for sure. And I also think like I just have such conflicted thoughts on like why people think like crying makes them like not a strong support system or not a rock in the moment. Because like I would argue, like I just said, that like crying with someone when they're going through something, or if you're going through something together, I think is a really beautiful and like bonding and connecting experience. And then you guys can kind of move forward through that post cry. But I understand both sides of that. And obviously like you don't want to just be like everyone's just like completely breaking down and like can't get out of bed and do anything. Like I understand that. But I do think there is such an emphasis on like crying being weak that people think that they can't show this person that's going through it them also breaking down. And it's like, no, I think that's human and like natural, and it will all be okay if we all cry a little together. So yeah, I have mixed reviews on that, but I understand that completely. And then someone said that they don't feel like crying helps them release their like anger, sadness, emotion, whatever they're feeling. And he said if he does cry when people are around, he like puts his head in his shirt or his sweatshirt, but it takes a lot to make him cry. And I think that's valid too. Like I think there's a lot of people that just like don't cry. Like they just like, that's not what their body naturally does. So like, I'm not saying everyone needs to like force themselves to cry when they're sad, but like if you are feeling the need to cry, that is when I'm crying's biggest fan, right? Like let it out. But I do get that like not everyone's like as emotional or as that's just not how their body processes emotions or things that they're going through. And I think that's so valid. So like, yeah, don't force yourself to cry. But if you do cry, I think it's okay to like show your guy friends that you're going through it, or that you're a little emotional, or that something got you upset, or show your parents that you're upset. Like I think that's okay, and like can build that connection that you have with those people, because then they know that you trust them and you feel safe around them. Oh, that reminds me, someone else said, I don't think I wrote it down, but on the pro side of crying, that when they do cry in front of people, it means that their body like feels safe and trusts them, like I just said. And they were like, thank you, body. And I think that was so sweet. Like, thank you for letting me cry and have this person here to do that with and feel safe doing that with. And I think that's so beautiful. So yeah, if you don't want to cry in front of just any Joe Schmo, find people that you can cry in front of, and lean on them and let them be your support system when you're sad or angry or emotional. And then some people who had mixed reviews on crying, some people said they don't like when people comfort them when they're crying. I think that's all personal preference. Like there's definitely times where I want to just cry in the shower and I don't want anyone to know, but there's also times where I'm like, I need to be held like a newborn baby while I'm crying, like there is complete both ends of the spectrum for me. So I think like knowing like, okay, this is a cry where I need someone to be on the phone with me while I'm crying, or I need to go cry with my mom, or I'm actually fine to just like cry for 5 seconds in my car. Like knowing that about yourself and figuring out what kind of cry it is extremely helpful. And then yeah, you can go from there when you get sad or something happens and you're like, oh, I need to call someone. This might be a bad one. Some people said that they were taught it was over dramatic or sensitive to cry, so then they kind of became like a shell of themselves, or just like put on an outer layer of like hardness and just became kind of that rock and didn't really let themselves cry in front of anyone, and kind of turned into the person that was just there for everyone else. And I think too, a lot of people did say that when like they're going through something, they kind of want to make everyone else think that they're like strong or that they're okay, so that their family and friends don't stress about them, which again, I have mixed reviews on that, because I don't know, I think it's okay to like not be okay all the time and to let people know that you're not okay. Obviously, if you're going through something like really intense, like I don't know, like cancer treatment, like that is there's studies about like the whole mindset that really affects that. So like I get like not breaking down every single day, you know, like you're trying to have a good mindset and like fight this battle mentally as well. So I get it. Like there's different situations where you want to be strong and be that rock for your family or whatever, or like just for yourself. Like I get that. But again, like if you're sad and that's how your body's feeling emotions in that moment, because nobody's crying for like days straight, like every hour of the day, every second, like, do you know what I mean? Like usually you're gonna cry for like 20 minutes, 30 minutes or whatever, and then like you get it out and then you just feel okay, like a little bit lighter, and you feel like you can then move through the day. Or even if you're not doing anything and you still just want to lay in bed, like you feel like you can just kind of feel a little bit clearer, at least for me in my experience, and a couple people did say that as well. So I'm like, have mixed thoughts on the like not letting yourself cry at all because you're trying to be strong for the people around you, whereas on the other hand, I think it's sometimes important to just like let it out, because then you'll be able to be strong for the people around you, because it's going to come out eventually, whether it's like punching something or you know what I mean? Like those emotions are going to come out. And like I said at the top of the episode, I think crying is one of the like most healthy ways you can do that, because it's harmless, right? It's not hurting anyone. It's not hurting yourself. And it's like relatively, obviously different situations will warrant longer time periods of emotion, but I think it's relatively a quick thing that just kind of happens, and then you're able to then move forward with whatever you're dealing with. Some people said they were a hardcore crying hater and now they are trying to be more comfortable with it. Again, that's from being told it was too much or too sensitive or whatever. Oh, I got a couple people saying that they're not afraid to cry in front of people, but their body like doesn't let them cry in front of people. And I thought that was interesting too. And I asked a couple people why, and they said it's just like a subconscious thing that they like would cry if their body would let them, you know, in front of people, but it just doesn't. And I think that's interesting. I think that's also like your body's kind of like protecting yourself, but I think that goes back to like whatever you believe about crying. Like if you believe crying in front of people is a bad thing or a weakness, and like subconsciously your body's like, oh, well, I'm not going to do that when there's people around. I'll just do it when I'm by myself, you know? If you're one of those people that you think that your body just like rejects crying in front of others or at all, maybe reflect on like what you actually think about crying and see if that helps at all. Not saying that you like want to cry all the time, but like, you know, if you're trying to just like not hold in your emotions as much, kind of reflect on like what your thoughts are about crying and what, you know, you feel like you believe about crying. But now let's get to the good part. Well, this whole thing has been good, but I meant the good benefits of crying part of this episode. And I have quite a few here. So I touched on the first one, that our emotional tears have high levels of stress hormones in them. So you're physically releasing those hormones, which is a good thing when we cry. Another thing, I might say this word wrong, but emotional tears have manganese in them, which connects to your mood regulation. So it can help you regulate your mood when you are crying. And then crying has also been proven to activate the part of our nervous system that slows down your heart rate, aka helps limit or slow down your anxiety and stress levels, which is a huge positive, right? If you can, you know, if you're having a panic attack and you're crying, it's actually going to eventually help you slow down your heart rate via the tears. These are all on different articles of Google, so like take each one with a grain of salt. They all seemed reliable, like they were reliable sources, but this is just what I'm going to tell myself, even if it's not 100% accurate. It's placebo, right? You know, crying slowing down my heart rate. And then studies also show that it helps relieve physical pain. So like when you stub your toe and you just like immediately start crying, I think that is like a natural thing that our bodies do, and it helps kind of like take the focus off of the pain that you're feeling, or helps kind of soothe the pain that you're feeling. Also, research said that it might help specifically babies, but anyone fall asleep faster, and that's why babies cry when they're going to sleep. Although I think they're probably crying for a number of reasons. I wouldn't know. I've never been around a newborn when they're crying in the evenings, but I think for me, it helps me fall asleep. I love going to sleep after a nice cry. So that's another benefit. And then it increases empathy, connection, and support from friends and family members when you cry in front of them. So we touched on this a little bit, but when you let yourself feel those emotions in front of people, it actually allows them to like understand you better and connect with you and support you and just build that relationship overall. And then studies show it's actually bad to hold in your emotions because it's not processing your feelings. So when you're holding in your tears, you're actively stopping your body's natural way of processing something. Again, if you're not a natural crier, maybe this doesn't pertain to you, but if you are somebody that like cries in reaction to emotion and you're not letting yourself do that, it's actually harmful to hold that all in and will lead to more stress and anxiety and anger, guilt, whatever the emotion that you're dealing with is. Also, I just remembered one more Instagram comment that I would be very regretful if I forgot to mention it. My friend said something about how she doesn't understand crying and when she cries because like something horrible, like really traumatic will happen in her life and she like does not shed a tear, and then like something like a minor little inconvenience will happen and she's like breaking down crying. And this was so relatable because I think sometimes when like big things happen, immediately I think we go into like fixing mode and we're like, okay, I can't break down right now, let me fix this and then I'll cry about it. Or like it's just, especially if it involves like other people that you care about, I feel like I'm so quick to be like, okay, I have to like help, I have to fix this, and like I can't be laying in my bed crying right now, like I'll get it out later. But then like when there's just like a minor inconvenience, like you stub your toe or something, it's just like usually it's like the last straw on that day and you're just like literally anything could have happened and you would have like immediately started crying. I literally like slammed my thumb in my front door the other day after being outside for like 30 minutes with Puda, and it was like, it's been so cold at night, so it literally felt like my thumb like snapped off and I just literally started scream crying because it hurt so bad. But also obviously I knew my thumb was gonna be fine, but I was just like, it was just a day, and I literally started crying on the couch because it was just so annoying, and like I could have avoided it by just moving my thumb, but it's just funny to think about. I think that's something a lot of us experience when like it's just that last little inconvenience on that day that's just been a day sent from hell itself, and you just lose it. Even like people probably around are like, damn girl, you just like stubbed your toe, like it's okay, like but like no, it's not okay. I'm laughing because this is me literally once a week at least. But yeah, I think back to not understanding like why we cry and stuff, it's like, or when we cry, I think it's just kind of whatever your body is naturally doing in that moment. If it's something that feels like you can fix it and you can be of support, like I think that's probably what your body's going to naturally go to first. And then, if you still need to cry once you go through all of that, you will. But if not, it's okay that you don't shed tears when something horrible happens. I think everyone processes things differently, and I know for me, there's sometimes I'm like, I didn't cry about that. That's shocking. Like I didn't cry at the Wicked movie. Everyone was leaving the theater sobbing, and I was like, I loved it. I thought everyone was phenomenal. Didn't shed a single tear the first time I saw it. And then the second time I saw it, I did like get a little emotional, but I was like, what are we all crying about? So yeah, there's things that, and I cry, like I'm a crier. So like, it was just funny to me that I did not feel the way I thought I was going to feel after seeing that movie. But yeah, no, it's normal to experience things differently than other people. It's normal to experience things differently than you used to experience them, or the way you used to react to things. I think that's all very normal, to just give yourself grace and, be like, okay, today I'm not really crying about this, but what can I do in another way to process? Maybe I journal or I talk on the phone with somebody. So yeah, I thought that was a really good point to mention. But my final thoughts are that crying is good. Overall, crying is good, right? And holding in our tears is bad for the most part. And then, yeah, there may be a time and a place that's best for you to cry, but you eventually want to let it out. I think that's the moral of the story. And one last note I want to say is let's just check ourselves and make sure that we're not making other people feel bad for crying, that we're not calling them sensitive, we're not telling them that they're overdramatic or they're too much, or that, saying anything that would make them feel shameful or embarrassed or guilty for crying in front of you, because that's just going to further this process or this cycle of people being afraid to cry in general, or especially in front of their friends or people around them. And we don't want that. We want people to be able to process their emotions, and you want to be, maybe you don't. I want to be a good support system to my friends, and I think that adds to me being the best version of myself, and that is my ultimate goal. So if you also want to be the best version of yourself, make sure you're not making people feel bad for crying or feeling their emotions, because you do it too. We all do it. I think those are my final thoughts there on that. But thank you so much for listening to another episode. Reminders to subscribe on YouTube, give us a like, leave us a comment. You can comment on Spotify as well, and follow on Spotify, follow us on Instagram and TikTok. I'm not sure if TikTok will survive after this weekend, but there will be clips on there from this episode if it does. If not, we will be posting all of our things on Instagram. And one more thank you to everyone that submitted your thoughts on crying to me. It was really helpful and insightful for this episode, so thank you. And one more reminder to let me know if you want one of these sweatshirts. I will try to make that happen if people are interested. And yeah, if no one's told you recently, I love you, I'm proud of you, and you're kicking life's butt. And thank you for listening, and I will see you all next week.